It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. From Fantha Tracks TV, this is Good Morning Tatooine!
Good morning, Tatooine, and welcome to the live stream. We're live once again to discuss the latest Disney Plus Star Wars show, Andor. Episode 4 dropped yesterday, and we've been checking it out. And joining me to discuss that episode and everything else Star Wars from FanthaTracks.com, Mr. Mark Newbold. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Bri. How you doing?
Not too bad, thanks. Busy week, and Andor dropped middle of the week as well, so excitement as always when there's Star Wars coming at you every single Wednesday.
Yeah, it's a good time to be a fan, isn't it? You know, the amount of content we've got coming, but Andor, it's meaty fare. It's there's plenty to dig into on this one.
Yeah, there's a lot of depth to the programme. Slow burn, I think, it's fair to say, on a lot of it, but there's a lot happening in the episodes when you dig below the surface a little bit. There's a lot of references in there, a lot of little Easter eggs, and we've been covering those, I think, on the site each week with our sort of in-depth reviews into the episodes as well. So if people want to find out a little bit more about some of the things getting mentioned in the show, you can check out those articles.
Yeah, we're very lucky. We've got Sander DeLang, who's written for Insider and StarWars.com and all sorts of places. Just real sort of deep dive digs into all the Easter eggs, and there's some real way back stuff in there, like early West End game stuff. It's fascinating read, most of which I'm completely oblivious to. So it's always good to have a read of those.
What was your overall impression of this episode?
I really enjoyed it. I mean, it's become evident that these are. I mean, I'm assuming it's going to continue because that's certainly the pattern for season 2. They've made that clear. But it feels like the first 3 were a chunk, which made sense putting those out as a block last week. And this feels like the start of the next chunk. I did enjoy it. It was, you know, they've got this amazing set they've built for Ferrix down in Buckinghamshire. They've got a whole cast of characters for that. And we've just up sticks and moved, which kind of, I mean, that's a common thing. But, you know, I like the fact that it's not staying in one location. That was one, not problem, but one regret I think I had over Book of Boba was that it was too Tatooine focused, you know, and I love that as a location. And please, let's see more of that. But I want to see more of Ferrix, even though Ferrix feels like a very real world industrial place. And now we move to Old Harney, which is, well, essentially your neck of the woods. But, you know, it's an idyllic sort of fairly quiet planet. There's not a huge amount going on. You know, so we're into a new location, but also, of course, we're hopping between wherever Aldhani is. You know, I think they described it as near to nothing, close to everything. So I think I know where it might be in the galaxy. But also straight back to, you know, Coruscant, heart of the galaxy, essentially, which was equally fascinating.
Of course, you mentioned the sort of the blocks of 3. This episode saw a change in director to Susanna White. Writing the episode was Dan Gilroy, which obviously Tony Gilroy's brother, but still he's got his own unique way of doing things.
Yeah, it felt like this episode. You mentioned the stuff we've got going on Fantha, lots of things, lots of reviews, lots of looks at it. We're doing stuff on Making Tracks. Obviously, you're doing these special Good Morning Tatooines. Claire Henry has put a piece in for the group article on Saturday, and she said this really felt like the start of the sort of the espionage element of the show, you know, and you are seeing, which I thought was fascinating, to see those ISB characters bitching and sniping and power playing and, you know, Game of Thronesing their own little kingdoms, completely missing the fact that there is a greater good to defend on their behalf anyway, and the alliance that isn't even an alliance yet. You know, these pockets of rebellion are starting to gear up. Yeah, really interesting, thought-provoking episode.
Yep. So let's dig into some images from the show. First up, we've obviously got Luthen Rails, and he's on his ship. He's taking Andor off planet, and as you say, the head to Aldhani. Can't
Old
say it.
Harney, yeah, Old Harney.
Aldhani, however you want to pronounce it, Aldhani. I quite like the ship. There's a lot of sort of uniqueness to it. It's got a lot of elements of the Millennium Falcon in there in terms of the curvature on the dome there. But a little bit fancy. The guy's got a bit of wealth behind him.
Yeah, it's a beautiful ship. I mean, it's a great design. I'm looking for. I know there's a lot of ship nerds out there that will really be interested in this, and people who play the role play stuff will be interested in the stats and all the other elements. But on that picture there, if you're looking at that picture, which I hope thousands of people are right now, to the left of the picture, sort of 2/3 of the way down, there's a little circular block with 3 little lenses. That is quite the character. That scene where Andor Cassian is looking quite clearly at the yoke with a view to maybe I can steal this thing, and that thing just turns around and says, "Is there anything I can help you with, sir?" Thought that was brilliant. That gave me L3 vibes. And we've talked on making tracks about reaction chats about the possibility of, hey, maybe B2 could end up being incorporated into K2SO to give him a bit of that extra personality. And now I've seen Luthen's ship and I'm thinking, maybe it could be this guy. So, there's a bit of character to it. But yeah, I want to know more about that ship. That's a beaut.
And there's a little bit of tension still between Luthen and Cassian. They're not really in sync at the moment. Cassian's not really sure Luthen's intentions. Really, all they've done is escape through necessity together at this juncture. And he's kind of teasing, do you want to be part of this rebellion? And I think Cassian's maybe a little bit more interested in the cash at this point in time.
Oh, totally. Yeah, he's not. I think Luthen and the information he's been given, which he kind of assumes some of us come from Bix, he can see that there's the core of a guy who's willing to do whatever it takes, which is the blunt instrument that he needs. Mark on Making Tracks Broadcaster says kind of referred and compared him to the Daniel Craig version of Bond, a bit of a blunt instrument, which I thought was a good analogy. But yeah, 200,000 credits is going to interest anybody. There's Han Solo 5 years later going 17,000, and he's being offered 200,000, and he gets given basically a kyber crystal that's worth 50,000. So clearly, Luthen I think he's trusting his gut more than he's trusting Cassian at this point, and kind of gambling on some kind of integrity that he hopes is there. But he doesn't want Cassian, I guess, ultimately to have too much integrity, because I assume over the course of the next 2 seasons and what we see in Rogue One, if he's got too much integrity, he's not going to do the missions, is he? He's going to question a lot of stuff. And Tony Gilroy has said that this will make you look at Rogue One in a slightly different way, which I'm fine with because it's still fresh enough that you can play with it. So, yeah, very interesting relationship.
Exchange rate could come into play here. Difficult subject this week.
Difficult subject real world stuff.
But yeah,
tell me.
Could come into it. We kind of mentioned where are we? We mentioned the Imperial Security Bureau as well. We'll pull up that. We had a really nice, sleek design and to the Bureau headquarters, I guess, on Coruscant.
Yeah.
Kind of liked it, kind of fresh, new, slightly a little different. I noticed up on National Geographic's Twitter, they've got a little thing into the locations of Andor today. And that's one of them that kind of mentions trying to get this new style and new look to Coruscant. So, yeah, I kind of dug that. And we've got like a new group of interesting people. Would be the nicest thing to say. And we haven't seen too much of the Empire in live action, really, from this kind of perspective. These are the kind of people doing the sort of dirty work.
Yeah, these are the nuts and bolts people, aren't they? And I like, it's a good point you make, actually. It's easy to see the top end guys. I'm not familiar with all the names yet. Obviously, Deidre Miro, we know, but the other characters not so much. But we'll get there. And they are, like you say, they've all got sectors, and there's plenty of sectors. I think there's over 1,000 sectors, or there certainly used to be. So these people are in control of large swathes of the galaxy, or the Imperial Hell galaxy anyway, that they're fussed about. yeah, it was good to see that, and to see, as I said, to see the infighting and the bickering and the positioning and the posturing and all the sort of the Admiral Motti, the Motti character was always sort of written to be from high imperial families, and you kind of get the feeling that these people are all, there's no working class guys here, so it's very much a society. It's almost like a society thing, which I think it's going to be fascinating because they're so missing the big picture. Apart from Deidre, who you can just see at the to the right there.
So the main guy, I guess, is Major Partagaz. It's played by Anton Lesser, who people maybe know from Game of Thrones. He's sort of the man in control. Dedra Miro, played by Denise Gough. She's obviously on the lower rungs, trying to scrape her way to the top. And we were also introduced to Ben Bailey Smith, that people maybe know better as Doc Brown. The comedian, actor, he goes by Ben Bailey Smith, his real name. For that, he's playing Lieutenant Supervisor Blevin, and a little bit higher up the rankings than Dedra Miro, and the tension's there.
Yeah, that was fascinating. I always think of him in the In-Betweeners. A fascinating scene between the two of them, because I think I was looking at the ranking pips, and I think they've got the same ranking, but she's just come in 6 months ago from another department, and the way that Partigan was talking kind of inferred that she'd been recommended. I think there's more to her, either her command or her family history. There's a connection there. There's something. There's more there. That
he was specifically referred to as a lieutenant. I don't think she was. And the other the other guys were sort of referred to as supervisors, as far as I remember. So I wonder if there is still like some kind of hierarchy in there as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think probably by tenure, but the guy that sat next to him loses his part of his portfolio to him in that briefing room scene. And so I think because he's got 6 sectors and she's got 2 sectors, and you don't know the importance of each their sort of respective sectors and where they are, I suppose that gives you some sort of hierarchy. But yeah, just the sniping and, like you say, there's always pissing contests in any of these shows, cop shows, anything. There's always people wanting to stand their ground, but here it was so ingrained in the way that they operate already. It's like, yeah, you can see Cassian walking in and stealing their food and peeing in the soup and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and Dedra doesn't take too kindly to it. That's a great look.
Yeah. Oh, totally. She was brilliant. Like I say, she's one of the bad guys. Like Cyril Khan, you think he's not here to help the galaxy. He's on a career path, and maybe they'll both have a change of heart. But I think with him being on Coruscant, they'll probably end up partnering up at some point, because they're both on the same trail, but at different positions on it, if that makes sense. Yeah, she's definitely going to be a fascinating character because, look at the room she's in, look at the company she's keeping. And just briefly, you mentioned the architecture really was quite stunning. And because Coruscant's a city planet, it's an urban planet, pretty much completely. They've got so much scope to drop in these things. But I always wonder with Coruscant, because there's such a history of being part of the Republic for so long and different buildings having different purposes. I wonder, is that a brand new purpose-built building for the ISB, or maybe at some point that was a Republic building that had another function? I'd love to know.
The thing I kind of picked up on more than anything on Coruscant was, I guess we're most familiar with it from the prequel era, when you had the Jedi Temple and everything there. And everything, the skyline and the colours of the buildings, it was bright and it was vibrant. Definitely they put a tone of grey, miserable.
Yeah.
Everything quite stark. And I kind of like that kind of switch up. And, you're playing with the same kind of planet, and you're just subtly showing the change in mood.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you're right. Because that's a good point. Actually, I never thought of that. Because, like you're saying, in the prequels, you saw a lot of sunsets and a lot of neon when you went into the different districts and so on and so forth. Yeah, this felt like it had been raining a lot. I know they have weather control there, but still, yeah, it's good point. It's more Blade Runner-y in that sense, sort of grimy.
Yeah, that's actually a good comparison, I think, Blade Runner. And obviously the contrast, Aldani. My backyard. obviously they're going for extremely rural element, and they're kind of implying that there's a touch of the Imperials now entering this planet, and we kind of start to see the stark elements of the Imperials coming into it as well, in terms of they've got their payroll of all things situated on the planet in an underground. I guess they're going to call it a bunker. In real life, it's a dam. So I keep have to watch crossing between real life and the show here. Remember it. It's effectively they're classing it as an underground Imperial base, really.
Yeah.
And we went straight back to Luthen and Cassian and their sort of negotiations. We mentioned earlier he's due 200,000. This is his 50,000 deposit, and it was kind of the ideas of Kyber coming back into things. Told this is 50,000, but it's worth a lot more to Luthen, so there's maybe going to be a story behind this as well. There seemed to be quite a big play on it. I don't know what your thought was.
We talked about this on Reaction Chat, and the bringing in of the Kyber. We both thought it's probably at this juncture, and hopefully remains, the only. That's nice, Matt. The only link to, firstly, the Jedi, because there's not a mention of it. Like, there really wasn't much apart from Vader at the end in Rogue One, and also a link to Jeddah. Just the Kyber link just hooks you to Jeddah, and I think maybe if in later second season possibly, but maybe even in the first, there's a possibility of going to Jeddah. So there was that as well. And also Luthen, I think maybe the reason why he's interested in Cassian is that there's probably, and we probably won't see it in the show, but we may see it in sort of ancillary material, books and comics, that he has a history of similar tone. Obviously, we're 14 years into the Imperial era, and Luthen's a more mature guy, so he was never Cassian's age, but you probably see that, if they do something, he was probably a separatist or he was a Republican or whatever he might be. You see something in him that, in Cassian that reminds him of himself. So there's those elements there. But yeah, I thought that was quite a play. But by the same token, we also know that Luthen runs this incredible shop on Coruscant, and he's got access to these things. So there's a bit of play there as well, I think.
Yeah. Talking of Luthen, he meets up with Vel Sartha, played by Faye Marsay, someone else you may know from Game of Thrones. She was a waif in Game of Thrones. Also in Black Mirror, I remember her from as well. And she was an interesting introduction. A lot of tension between her and Luthen. There's obviously history going back there. She's part of the rebellion in some form. We're still really unclear as to Luthen's play in this. He seems to be on the fringes a little bit, playing his own little game separate to everybody else. And very tense when she's told that she's got to include Cassian into the plans on the base. Didn't appear happy. She kind of had her own crew assembled, didn't want to add one more to it.
Yeah, there's a few layers to that, I think. One, whether or not Luthen has entirely the trust in her and the team that is required for such an important mission. And obviously, as that mission gets explained, it's real. It's a 1 day in 3 year shot sort of thing. Bear in mind, you don't know how long a year is on this planet, so that factors in as well. But nevertheless, also, yeah, what's the power play here? What's the stage here? Luthen's saying one thing to Cassian, but his tone with her indicates something else. More than a sense of urgency, he's making it clear. And also, she's not going to be thrilled, as she says, that they've just spent 5 months living off roots, and he very tactlessly, I thought, comes in and says, "I'm paying the guy." Oh, great, a mercenary, and I'm not just paying him handsomely. Yep. You've got to wonder whether he's ever actually going to get that money, but nevertheless, quite a lot going on there. But she's definitely the boss of that team, no doubt.
And basically, they've been as you mentioned, they're kind of been living underground, trying to make themselves part of the locals, so they don't raise suspicions amongst the Imperials, living with their own sort of livestock and their own little sort of farming huts as well. And so they've been underground for quite some time, and you get the impression there hasn't been much contact with the outside world. And tensions are high. Cassian gets allocated to that crew, and we head back to Coruscant, I guess, where the corporate sectors guys, they're getting dismissed. Poor Chief Hine, Sergeant Linus Mosk, and our old favourite there, Cyril Karn, who's got the sad face on again.
Yeah, just a bit. I think this is still on Preox, but yeah, they're definitely getting the dressing down, and it's interesting with the whole corporate sector element, which is obviously it's an old hangover from the Han Solo Brian Daley books, but you saw it in The Last Jedi, Canto Bites in that area of space as well, and that at this juncture the Empire's doesn't need that much of an excuse to take back, land that presumably they essentially lease out to these corporations to sort of farm, inverted commas, for them. But yeah, you got to feel a little bit for the other guys. I mean, the dude in the middle wasn't even there. He was at an Imperial briefing. Khan has taken it upon himself to do what he did, and that gambit failed. And the sergeant's just a working man as well. So it's tough, but it's a good indicator of how the Empire runs their business, and the way they're sort of bagged, tagged, and dispatched sort of thing is quite brutal. And of course, we know where Cyril ends up.
I kind of classify it a little bit like the sort of old sort of lord system we have in the UK, where you've maybe got someone in charge of a region collecting taxes of 20% from the local population, and they pass on 10% to the king. If you can almost figure that to the way that these corporations are working with the Empire, and gathering up a lot of cash from the locals, passing on a good chunk of it onto the Empire and keeping some to themselves. It's kind of like that kind of group. They're all swiftly dismissed, and as you say, head off and do their own thing, and we'll catch up with them in a little bit, because the action flew straight back to Aldhani, and we're getting nice little shots of Scotland. And I've been debating with, we mentioned it earlier, Sandra, in these articles on the site, I've been debating with them all day as to where this is, because most of this episode was shot at Glen Tilt and not where the dam is. We've been debating whether this is going to be digitally altered images, and they're perhaps combining two different landscapes here in two different locations, because I can't pinpoint exactly where it is. River Awe is where we think the river is, but certain elements of the topography don't make sense to me. But regardless, the characters start to get to know each other. Things are tense. Cassian not too particularly happy to be joining up with his group, but he wants his cash. She's not particularly happy at having Cassian on board either. What did you think of the character of Vel?
I mean, she's in it. There's a reason she's in this, and there's a reason she's a leader. So I'll be kind of interested to find out about that. Whether we do in the show or elsewhere, I don't know. But the interplay between them as well. She's been out there in the wilds. We don't know where she's from. Is she from Aldhani? Is she from elsewhere? We don't know. Same goes for the rest of the team. And Cassian's dropped in with. You imagine you've been living off roots for 5 months, bedding in to become one of the locals, and then Cassian's dropped in on a beautiful starship. You're told he's getting paid, and he's only got to be there for 3 days before the mission. That must suck. So she's got to be a bit of a motivator for her team as well.
That's just
so
for me. I live on routes all the time until I come down to London and visit you guys.
You got some good roots up there, man.
Yeah.
We don't ferment our roots. That's the difference.
There we go.
There you go. But it's an interesting balance, and I think, I mean, the proof's in the pudding when the mission goes down, which presumably, I'm saying presumably because I'm watching She-Hulk and we've been expecting Daredevil for 2 weeks and he ain't turned up yet, so we can't assume anything. But they did say that it happens in 3 days, and so you're assuming that it's going to be, if not next episode rather, the one after. Whether this all works out, we don't know. But again, Cassian, I mean, to Luthen, Cassian's an unknown quantity. To a large degree, to the audience, we feel like we know him, but we know the 5 years down the line Rogue One version of Cassian as, fairly well, but we don't really know this guy. He's very much rough at the edges. We don't know if he's going to stick through the mission or bail. We know from what happened on Mimban that he was a cook that ran. That's all we really know. So all we've ever seen him do is run. So it's a tough one. It's a tough one. It'll be interesting to see how it plays.
And Father Dark's here chiming in. Bring on the Stormies. We're kind of there. I think we're going to get there next episode.
Yeah.
So as these guys were taking the high road back to the camp, Luthien was taking the ethical low road. See what I've done there?
I saw what you did there. Yeah, very good.
I love this scene, actually. He's kind of getting dressed up. He's getting himself in character. He has himself a little moment where he starts styling it on. Got the jingle jangle on. He's all set to go. Heading back to Coruscant. He's got his groove back on, and he's ready to slide back into the elite population, I guess, on Coruscant.
Yeah.
It was quite a fun scene. It was kind of a chance to see a very different side to the character.
Well, it reminded me of a low-tech Mission Impossible, with the old Tom Cruise putting the fake face on and stuff like that. So there was that element to it. There's that element to it as well, which I liked, but also the hidden compartment in the ship. I really love that hidden compartment. You just wouldn't know it was there if you didn't know it was there. Like to a lesser degree, Solo's smuggling compartments on the Falcon. So that was very cool. And yeah, Luthen doing this hiding in plain sight thing, which is really what Mothma's doing, and Bail Organa later will do. They're all doing that.
Yeah, and what Cassian said is how he manages to operate as well. So it's all kind of starts to link together.
Yeah. So I like that. I liked the way that he played that, and that he can turn it on and turn it off. And I know Stellan Skarsgård in an interview this week mentioned. I know I'm always flapping my hands around. I keep getting told off for it, so I'm trying to keep them out the screen. But he was sort of saying there's a lot of moving the hands around. He said finding the character was very much about the hands, as much as the change of the tone of the voice and the way he acts and such. So it'd be interesting to see how those characters play off each other, because it's not like the Emperor didn't. He was Sidious and he was Palpatine at the same time, so it's not new to Star Wars.
Yeah, and we headed back to the camp on Aldhani. This is Glen Tilt, just north of the Forest Lodge. If you're Google mapping it, trying to find out where they are, follow the river just beyond the Forest Lodge, and you will find where they filmed here. I believe the bridge we see in it, the production actually put that bridge in. There is very similar bridges to that in the area, but I believe that's one that the production built for their own needs. And obviously we've met some of these guys in the trailer, and we kind of get introduced to the different characters. Don't really get to know much about them at this stage, so I'll maybe not go too in depth into them because it's hard to judge who they are. The one thing that I thought was interesting was there some kind of recognition between Cassian and Cinta? There seemed to be a look between the two of them.
They definitely did. Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, it's that old small galaxy thing that could raise its head, which often does in all Star Wars. Which is why the Mimban mention for Cassian made me raise an eyebrow. On one hand, it's cool. They're mentioning Mimban again. But then when he did the numbers, it was like, oh crap, are we going to have an episode where Han Solo turns up? Which would be cool, but then, it's it just totally sticks to the whole. There are actually only 1,000 characters in all of Star Wars, despite there being trillions of people. So, but yeah, I did pick up on that little look. There was a look, so
I wonder
you've
if
got
we're
to
going to
wonder.
find out she's from Kenari.
That would make sense if she's one of the kids at the start, the
Yeah.
flashback scenes. Yeah, that's possible. That's definitely possible.
Yeah, and we'll maybe come back to these characters next week, because I think we're going to find out a little bit about them all. Because I think the impression I certainly got is they're all going to have a little task to do as part of this raid on the bunker. So
Yeah,
we get a chance to get their personalities more in depth next week. Moving swiftly on, my poor favourite guy in the show, Cyril, guess what happens to Ollis at one point? Got a right slap from his mother, and then a hug, because it doesn't matter what you do, mother's always going to love you, and he's obviously let her down some way. I'm guessing he's let his career get ahead of his personal life a little bit. That seems to be this kind of type of guy he is.
Yeah.
And he's back home on Coruscant. So at what point he surely his life is going to collide with the Imperial Security Bureau at some point, isn't it?
Yeah, it feels like it. And it was interesting, the first time I watched it, I didn't pick up that we'd switched to Coruscant. Because he never saw him travel to Coruscant, I just thought that was an urban area of Preox Milana. But then watching it again, it's like, no, actually, yeah, that is Coruscant. He's just been sort of sent there, so that was cool. And also seeing, we've seen a lot of Coruscant, but it's always been Senate buildings or Jedi buildings or Imperial buildings or operas. You don't tend to see or bars like the Outlander. You don't tend to see too much of the living areas. You saw industrial areas at the end of Attack of the Clones, but this is like the scariest urban sprawl of concrete high-rise blocks. Her house may be perfectly lovely, but it just feels so oppressive almost. It's very.
Trashed it now. You're getting a slap too. You've trashed our house.
I'm sorry, Mum. Yeah, it's terrible. But it's got that grey Soviet Union feel about it. I'm waving my hands around now. I get told off. I loved the whole play of that. Him go just the metaphor for his career of him going down down the lift, down. You could see his face just mortified. Of God, I've got to go home. I'm 35 and I'm going back to my mum's house. It was that sort of feel. So because it feels like his whole life's in those two bags.
Yeah. And we kind of got to see the complete opposite of that, the opulence of Coruscant as well. When we went inside Luthien's shop, where we met for the first time Mon Mothma in the show. And a little bit controversial, I think, because his shop is basically selling items stolen, I'm going to say, from all around the galaxy, which kind of seems to fly in the face of what the Rebels are kind of all about.
Yeah. I mean, it was.
It's a little bit British Museum, is the way I described it on Twitter, where he'll claim it's his, and he got it perfectly legally, but ethically.
Yeah, you got to wonder. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things in there, and I know people are doing deep dives into it, and I'd love to sort of have a proper screenshot through. A lot of people have seen the the carbon froze Indiana Jones whip in there, and there's a few other character Starkiller armor. There you go. You see the Mando armor. You see Plo Koon's kind of face mask, that sort of stuff. So there's definitely plenty of that kind of thing in there. It's a front. I mean, for his character, you've got to assume it's a front for what he's doing, and it's a great scene as well. Like you say, Mothma coming from this opulence, which you see even more of later. It just juxtaposed against guys eating roots on the side of a hill, waiting to steal, the quarterly payroll. It's real high stakes stuff at both ends in totally different ways.
When you mention the payroll again, who gets paid quarterly? That's rough. That's a rough life working for the Imperials. You've got 3 months to wait to get paid. Terrible. Anyway, nice shot. I took a nice close up of Luthen. I just thought that it's a nice change in style for him, and just showing different character he's played, and I think we may yet see more characters from him throughout the show, I think, as well.
One thing that struck me was a lot of our hero characters have a sort of an older counterpart. You think Solo had Beckett and Cassian's got Luthen, and different people. You'd sort of think Mon Mothma's more entrenched now in her role and what she does, but there's probably somebody that's her mentor, and it's he's fascinating. Luthen, his whole setup, what he's about, how it plays, how it's going to play out over the 5 year, the 5 story years, but the 2 seasons is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, and of course Genevieve O'Reilly back as Mon Mothma. Great to see her back, and great to see her back getting quite a meaty role. I think it's going to be.
Yeah, the character has always been interesting and but lightly sketched. I think she served a purpose in Jedi, but we didn't. Obviously, Caroline Blackiston never had swathes of dialogue to deliver, but that key scene was so important. And yeah, obviously she's in Sith a little bit, she's in Rogue One a fair bit more, but this one, like you say, I think we're going to really get to delve into it, and we're already in this episode learning things about the character that we either never even considered or didn't know. Fascinating home life.
Yeah, and there we go, Perrin further, husband of Mothma.
Yeah, or as my wife Ruth described him, her twat of a husband. That was her exact quote, which I think is perfect. Perfect description.
And he's invited Sly Moore round for dinner, which was not the kind of dinner guest you want, is it really?
No, definitely not. Given her position and just his whole demeanour, he just wants to enjoy the money, have fun. I don't think he cares who's in control as long as he can do his own thing. He's not interested in politics. You wouldn't. Yeah, it's on his iPad. You wonder whether or not, and we discussed this on reaction chats. Does he come from money? Does she come from money? Is it from the position that she's in politically? He doesn't seem to have much. We don't know. We've got no idea really, but we suppose, positive whether maybe he's a kept man. What's his position? Whatever his position, he just comes over as a bit of a dick. Yeah. And next week it's going to be fascinating. If we see that meal, which we sincerely hope we do, that could be really interesting.
The Matt mentions there about the iPad, and there's one thing I'm going to call out on the show this week in terms of the stylizations of things. I thought they did everything really well apart from that, because it's so huge and chunky and heavy looking, and yet throughout Star Wars we've seen them with tiny, thin, almost glass-like panels in their hands. So I just think they got it wrong. He's supposed to be a man at all points. He's on Coruscant. What are you doing with something that looks like someone should have on their beaten up Millennium Falcon? So yeah, that was the one thing I didn't like. But,
well, if that's the only thing you didn't like, Bri, we're doing well.
We haven't got to the bit I didn't like yet. If you're lucky, we'll run out of time.
Okay.
Let's move swiftly on. Let's go back, Aldani, and they're planning the big heist. And I hope it's going to be a big heist, because kind of Rogue One kind of teased it and Solo kind of teased it. I don't think they particularly delivered too well on having someone undercover in uniform, kind of stealthy and everything like that. It seemed it was a little bit too much action and over a little bit too quick. I hope this one's got a lot of depth to it. And as I mentioned before, I hope all the characters were kind of introduced to each have their own little role and it plays out nice. But they were kind of given the overall plan, and the dam there, that's not a dam in the show, but is in fact an Imperial underground base where they do their payroll, kind of place I would work. And they kind of explained how they're going to raid it and how they're going to steal the money, which, again, seems to be physical in its nature and not digital. So are these people getting their quarterly payroll, so 3 months of pay, in physical hard cash? There you go.
It's interesting. It makes you wonder. It's not something I've ever given much thought to. Stormtroopers must get paid. You kind of assume that a lot of their money probably gets sent home to family. Um, what how does a stormtrooper spend his money? There's only so many donuts he can buy. But with the with the lay of the land with this mission that they're doing, yeah, Solo's a good comparison. I think I did a piece on StarWars.com and I described the Convoy X chase in Solo as the best Star Wars action piece of them all, and I stand by that. I think it's fantastic. But the actual heist element, stealing that train with the coaxium, it's a great sequence, but there's a lot more they could have done, like the end of Rogue One. There's other stuff going on. There's a lot more they could have done. So hopefully with this, like you say, getting undercover, it's a bit more like Last Jedi in that sense, getting undercover in uniform and doing, trying to get in and really doing what Cassian said, walking in like you're meant to be there, and stealing stuff from them. This is literally what Cassian was talking about in that room with Luthen last week, which is probably why he's been dropped onto this job.
Talking of payroll, was Mr. Mothma logging on his iPad to watch accountant vids? If you watch TikTok, I'm sure you know what accountant videos are. Moving swiftly on to what is a shocked face at that comment.
Yeah.
An outraged face at the notion that she's not been allowed to investigate Cassian's theft effectively on Ferrex. She denied that request. She's not happy. It's staying with Doc Brown. Or in fact, what's his character called again? Blevin. Lieutenant Supervisor Blevin. This is going to be Doc Brown. Everyone was excited. I kind of was hoping that the whole idea of Christopher Lloyd being in Mandalorian 3 fell through, and the whole rumor was just that Doc Brown's going to be in Star Wars, and they just got it completely wrong. But there we go. It could still happen. It could still be the case. That would be a great failure in a rumor. But she wasn't happy. She's not happy. Cyril's not happy. Are they going to break some rules and do their own little investigation? It kind of feels like they might. And it kind of feels like Luthen might be the one that's going to get caught out rather than Cassian, I think.
Yeah, it does. I mean, he's at this point, Cassian's pretty much as low on the ladder as he can be, I guess, in this particular cell, because they're not unified yet. So this is just Luthen's specific cell, I would say. I know Mothma and him have this connection. She probably has connections with a lot. We haven't seen him yet, but she's probably still talking to Saw Gerrera. It was clear in Rogue One that they splintered off and became a dangerous, uncontrollable faction, but maybe at this point there's still dialogue that we'll see. So, Mothma's the one that's trying to balance all of this stuff. But as far as Deidre goes, I think it's the old Imperial officer thing. If you make too much noise and you stick your head up a bit too far and get noticed, you're probably going to get force choked. And so I think with a lot of these Imperials, it's tick the boxes, stick to the process, don't make a fuss, don't make a noise, give me incontrovertible evidence. I don't want gut feeling. The rebels will go with gut feeling because they trust in the Force and they've got a different way of thinking. It's dialogue versus analog, digital versus analog rather. So, it's a different way of being. But at this point, yeah, I agree with you. I think her and Cyril, getting together and throwing ideas around and formulating a plan of action makes the most sense.
Yep. So that's kind of that's pretty much towards the end of the episode. The episode kind of ended with Cassian contemplating the task ahead.
Yeah.
Fair to say it was a slow episode. It was more, let's meet the different characters and let's put the people in place rather than it was action sequence or anything exciting on that end. So for some people it may not be their vision of what a Star Wars episode should be. But I felt it was overall pretty solid.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah, totally. It's different. I think that's the thing. There's no stormtroopers. There's no yet. Well, we saw 2 TIE fighters, didn't we? But there's no massive archetypal Star Wars things in it yet because we're on new worlds essentially. I know we're on Coruscant. Ignore Coruscant, but Old Arnie, Ferrex, the new places. That's all great. But I think as we move into the show, these institutions are going to become more common. I fully expect when they do the bank heist, I don't expect it to go completely smoothly and then walk out and not be chased and there not to be some sort of scene. It would be great if they could do it from a character point of view, but from a dramatic action point of view, probably not. I can't see all of those 7 making it out of the mission next week or the week after, whenever it is. So I think that's going to build and build and build.
Yeah. The one thing, and I'll try not to rant too much on it, that I didn't like about the episode is they're obviously trying to draw parallels between the Empire and the Rebellion and Scotland's own history with, let's just call it the English Crown for simple sake. It's slightly more complicated than that, but they're trying to draw that comparison in terms of storyline, I think, a little bit uncomfortable for me individually. I think living in Scotland on the basis that you're then using real world terms like the Highlands and the Lowlands.
Yeah,
I live in the Highlands, and for people who don't know, and then you're using issues like the Highland clearances, and you're mentioning the clearing of the local people, the population of Aldani. Getting a little bit too raw, I think. And I think they're looking at this and thinking this is a 200-300-year-old issue, but to be fair, that issues are still raw today in terms of living in the Highlands. We're still affected by issues from the clearances in terms of lack of population, lack of infrastructure, roads, telephones, electricity, whatever in certain areas, and it's very hard to develop anything anywhere, and you've still got issues in terms of land ownership. And it's one part, I think, of the UK really outside where there's crown estates where you've got people that own huge swathes of land and people just can't get any access to develop. Don't know what your thought is of bringing real world terminology into Star Wars. We kind of had this issue in the first 3 episodes with, we'll call it Smiley Poo, using real world words. If you're trying to connect issues, and especially when it's kind of politics, should you avoid using real world language? And I think, and it's fair enough, I can understand that words like the clearances, Highlands, Lowlands can be applied to other countries as well, but it's when people talk of the Highlands, people automatically talk of the Scottish Highlands.
Yeah.
And when you're filming in that same location, I think that adds a complication to the whole issue.
Yeah, and there's a lot of Scottish accents in this show. I know we spoke about it last week. You mentioned how they got a lot of the actors to use Glaswegian accents because that's just the way they wanted to play it. But it's tough. I mean, it's difficult. I mean, Lucas always used analogies, but he was far more subtle than that in the way that Roddenberry was so subtle in the 60s in getting all the issues of the day through the censors on Star Trek without telling you exactly what he was talking about. You watch that show and give it a bit of thought, and it was clear what he was talking about. I think Star Wars, you could touch on these kind of issues, but that's way too what you've just. I don't know the details of that to any depth at all. You clearly do. If you've picked up on that to the level that you have, then I'd say that's a fail on their behalf. It shouldn't be that overt. There's a lot of 21st century issues that are very, very important, that are not relevant to Star Wars because Star Wars is a massive galaxy that's evolved and a lot's going on. And do you know what I mean? So I'm waving my hands around again.
I guess my thought is they can achieve the same storyline point and not use the words like clearances, not refer to them as Highlands and Lowlands if you're going to go there and try and connect the politics to Scotland's history.
The location,
I think you just call it the North and the South, and you can achieve the same thing. You open up wounds to people. I used an analogy I was explaining to someone on social media about it that the land where they filmed at was formerly Clan Campbell, who were on the side of the English and fought against the Scottish. So if you're trying to create an Empire versus Rebellion, you've kind of picked the wrong place to film. And unless you're local and you're kind of part of a clan and you've still got that history flowing through you and it's passed down through the generations, you're not going to pick up on that. And I don't think there was an intent in any of the writing to. I don't know if offend's even the right thing. I think it was naive would be the way to describe it. I think where they thought, oh, we can do something quite clever here. Is honestly what I think they thought they were doing. And I got irritated, I think, watching it. And more so at the use of the word, the clearances. I thought that's just, don't like
Too
that.
on the nose.
Yeah.
But it's like you say, that the naughty word last week, I wasn't mad keen on it. I'm not offended by it. I just don't think it's right in Star Wars. I didn't like the use of the F-bomb in Star Trek, but at least Star Trek is Earth in the future. So you can that's got more latitude to touch on modern day issues because it's the same planet. It's just us in the future. Star Wars is a long time ago and a long way away. So a lot of issues aren't as relevant. There's so much you can do with all the characters and stuff in Star Wars. I don't think you need to lean on those crutches.
I quite like the politics of Star Wars at times and the way they introduce it. But I think you have to kind of create a distance between that and direct parallels. And I think if you're using the language that associates direct to the themes that you're trying to portray, that's awkward.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that was
don't
a
disagree.
disappointment. And I knew I was going to get irritated by the fact that they were going to use the word Highland. Just because I knew the visuals would pull me out a little bit, because it's like, hey, look, there's my homeland. It's going to pull you out the moment. Using the word Highland then on top of that pulls you out. And I didn't expect it to work the way it did this week on me, and it completely pulled me out. I didn't enjoy the story or the show until I watched it a second time this week. That was kind of my feeling on it, and I enjoyed it the second time because I knew what to expect. I knew I wasn't going to get irritated by it a second time round, and I thought it was good, and I'm looking forward. I'm wanting to see more Senate get really stuck into the politics on Coruscant a little bit, and I think we're going to head that direction. Certainly, if we have this big dinner next week.
Definitely, yeah. That's for me. That's a massive part of where it's at. One of the exciting things when Andor was announced was great. We're going to see more about Cassian. Is my favourite character from Rogue One, so I was thrilled that he was getting the show. But even then, it was, when did they announce it? 2018, 2019, something like that. That it was clear that the show had the opportunity, because of when it was set, to tell you where the galaxy is at 5 years, half a decade before Scarif and Yavin, and how it gets to the point that they've got the balls to try it, and the Empire's got lazy enough that they miss it. And already this is the episode that really flags up that, okay, I can see now how the Empire missed it, because they're too busy infighting, they're too busy, sniping and posturing and positioning and such. So that is going to be fascinating. But also, like you just said, to get back in that Senate room, which I'm so thrilled that it is still that Senate room, the history, just as a Star Wars location, not only the history in universe.
And just a reminder that the Emperor was democratically elected.
Yes, he was. Yes. Can we not talk about questionable elections this week with everything that's happening in the real world? But you're right. But and that was something we talked about on Reaction Chat, Making Tracks Reaction Chats. We talked about that, about you're not going to see the Emperor, more than likely not going to see the Emperor in that Senate chamber. I think they will stick more to the opening couple of pages of the original 76 novel. This changes in that it read like the Emperor was manipulated. We know he's not manipulated. He was the master planner, but he doesn't need to turn up to these things. I don't think you're going to see Vader in Andor. I'll be surprised if you see any of the top brass. I think this is lower down the rung at this point.
Yeah, he's your spin doctor, almost Darth Vader behind the scenes, if you were related to current politics.
I
was almost going to say who I thought he was, but I've not named names. So I'm looking forward to that. I want to see, and I don't know if we're going to see it, but we know Saw Gerrera is going to be in the series. I'd like to see some tensions amongst the rebel factions as well, and that not be such
happy family
sailing. And at some point, I don't know if it's going to be this show. I don't know if this show is the right one to do it, but how the Rebel Alliance comes together. And I've always been fascinated by the fact they call it the Rebel Alliance, because it shows the fact it was factions. So I want to see the factions, I want to see the tensions, and then I want to see how they come together. I don't know if this is the right show for it, but time will tell.
It will. Yeah, you're right. I think, Cassian does mention a lot of those different groups. And we see it, and this is happening, I don't know whether it's just before or just after or concurrent with Rebels, but it's in that same sort of time period, and you've got that faction of rebels right there, the Lothal rebels, and what they're doing, and you see other groups in that. And I really must revisit that, 'cause it's been a long time since I've watched it, but it's more relevant now than ever, weirdly, with the Ahsoka coming. But but yeah, I think you will see what you've just described. Certainly, if you've got Forrest Whitaker, a guy like that, coming back to a show like this, to fill in that time period, that key moment when the partisans kind of go, we're all aiming for the same thing, we're all trying to do the same stuff, but we're not tiptoeing around like you guys. I don't have to worry about the Senate. We're going to blow the hell out of this stuff. That's their mission, and that's what they're doing. They are a militant faction of the rebels, which is quite a concept in and of itself. I think we will see that, and that could be interesting, because obviously, Jyn Erso connects to Saw, her family connects to Saw. Galen is probably, they did mention an Imperial engineer in this episode coming in, and I'm already thinking, wow, Galen Erso was an Imperial engineer. Yeah, Krennic's knocking around. Get your cape out, Bri. Krennic could be turning up at some point, so who knows?
And on the mention of explosions, I think the best way is to say, and on that bombshell, we'll call it an evening. Thank you, Mark, for joining me this week and discussing Andor episode 4. Looking forward to next Thursday. We'll be back discussing episode 5 and everything that adds to the tale of Cassian Andor. Thanks, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Keep up to date with the latest Star Wars news each and every day on FanthaTracks.com. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Tumblr, and Pinterest at FanthaTracks. And be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and follow FanthaTracks TV to be alerted to new content and be a part of our live shows.